Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. And we're on day 137, and we're looking at 2 Samuel 16, 17, and 18 today. So in 2 Samuel 16, 3 to 4, the question here, okay, where it's just a bunch of, it's not so random, but going through some things that really stand out in what we're reading today. We have to ask ourselves, is this a lie or a misunderstanding? Because remember Ziba. Ziba is the king assigned him as a servant to Jonathan's son. And as the king is leaving, Ziba has met with the king on his way out. He's got all kinds of supplies for him and everything else. And the king asks where his master is. And this is what we read. Where's your master's grandson? The king asked. He is still in Jerusalem, Ziba answered the king, because he thinks that the Israelites are now going to give his grandfather's kingdom back to him. Look here, the king said to Ziba, everything that belonged to Mephibosheth now belongs to you. Ziba said, I bow out of respect. Please think well of me, my master and king. Now we're going to read in a few chapters where Mephibosheth comes to the returning king, and the king asks where he was, and he turns around and says that Ziba abandoned him. Remember, he's crippled. He has no way. He's dependent upon other people to get him around. And he says that Ziba abandoned him. And at that point, there's no really telling what the truth is. So we're dealing here with either Ziba, who is lying about this, or some misunderstanding. But I would go with lying, because just the way he comes out and he says that Mephibosheth believes that the kingdom is going to be restored to him. And everything that we can understand, that just was not the way that Mephibosheth processed things. That's just not the way he thought. That was not his perspective at all. So anyway, moving on. Then we find here some lies of the enemy. Look at verse 7 and 8. This is from one of Saul's relatives, and he's come out and he's yelling things at David, and people want to go and kill him because he's attacking the king, and David said, just leave him alone. And we're going to look at that in a second. But look at what is being said to him. To David, he's saying, get out of here, get out of here. You are a murderer. You are despicable. Now, if you want to talk about Uriah, David is a murderer. But other than that, David hasn't murdered anybody. You are a murderer. You are despicable. The Lord has paid you back for all the blood of Saul's family. David never once raised his hand against Saul's family, ever. Never did it. And he took great steps in making sure that Saul's family was taken care of. He made that solemn pledge, that solemn promise, a solemn oath, and he's following through on it because he knows that's important. So him saying that this is the Lord paying back for all the blood of Saul's family, in whose place you rule, and the Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You are in this trouble because you are a murderer. Well, to a point that is true. It's because David opened the door to some curses in his family because of the raping of Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, but it had nothing to do with Saul and his family. So in that sense, it's wrong. But David, his reaction to this, I guess you could say, is typically David. In verse 11 and 12, they're saying, kill this guy. And look how David's handling the stress here. He says, listen, my own son, one of my very own children, wants me dead. This Benjamite can only feel the same, only more. Leave him alone and let him curse, because the Lord told him to. Perhaps the Lord will see my distress. Perhaps the Lord will repay me with good for this cursing today. So this is how David is looking at things and handling things. He's not going to, just as he's not confronting his son, he's not going to confront this man who's cursing him. He's not going to. He's at a place where probably he just can't handle anymore. He's older. He's older, and that means his whole body is processing stress differently. And in this case, he's doing the only thing that he knows how to do, and that's trusting the Lord. And that's what comes across here. That's basically what he's saying. In verse 22, here, this is hard to read, but this is exactly what the Lord told David would happen. He told David that, David, what David did in secret, in hiding, that the Lord would do in the open, in plain sight for everybody to see, and that his wives, his friend, that's how it's referred to, his friend will sleep with his wives in front of the whole nation. And this is what we have here. So they set up a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he had sex with his father's secondary wives in plain sight before all Israel. And it's a fulfilling of what the Lord said. Whether it's the Lord who just was telling David what the future held, or whether it's something that the Lord was involved in, it doesn't matter. Here it was. In 2 Samuel 17, going over to chapter 17, we find in verse 7 that David's spy did exactly what David left him behind to do. There is a very wise man whose wisdom was absolutely precious, and everybody was reliant on it, and he had gone over to Absalom. So David left his good friend Hushai there to confound this wisdom, to provide some alternative wisdom, just to see if he could befuddle the things that were going on, and it works here. We have Hushai said to Absalom, this time the advice of Ahithophel has given isn't right. It isn't right, is what he says. And we see here it worked. This whole thing, the alternative that he gave. Now, it would have worked if they had followed through. It would have worked because the king was vulnerable. The king is old. He's not like he was when he was young, and his friend is conveying to Absalom what David once was, and everybody knows David's reputation. Everybody knows what he was like. They may not be aware of his current conditions. So this works. And so we read, then Absalom and everyone in Israel agreed. The advice of Hushai from Eric is better than Ahithophel's advice. This was because the Lord had decided to counter Ahithophel's good advice, so that the Lord could bring disaster on Absalom. Okay, Absalom is not going to continue here. The Lord is not on his side. David is facing some consequences for his actions, but the Lord ultimately is going to rescue him from it. So we see that beginning to happen here. And then we see what happened to Ahithophel, and it's sad, and it's what happens when this is when our gift becomes our identity instead of our relationship with Yahweh. David's identity wasn't as king. David's identity wasn't as a shepherd. His identity was belonging to Yahweh. His identity was his relationship with Yahweh. And that's why when he fell, that's the thing that he was concerned about the most. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. But Ahithophel, he was a one-trick pony, really. So he his whole identity rested with this wisdom. And so we find here that once that's taken away from him, he has no reason to live. So in verse 23, meanwhile, once Ahithophel saw that his advice hadn't been followed, he saddled his donkey and went home to his own town. He gave instructions to his household, then hanged himself and died. He was buried in his father's tomb. And that's a real warning for us. It's really important for us to take this into consideration and make sure that our identity is not based upon our ministry. Our identity isn't based upon our church. Our identity is not based on our work or being a mom or a dad or anything else. That our identity is found in Jesus Christ and him alone. So that when our circumstances shift, when our identity in this world changes, what is truly our identity will never change, and we will always have a reason to wake up tomorrow. In chapter 18, verse 3, we see here that David arranges the army, but they won't let him fight. And that must have been really hard for him. I'm telling you, guys, as you get older, you have to make adjustments. You have to adjust for aging. And it's best when you cooperate with that, when you understand it and cooperate with it. And here David needed to understand he was aging. He did not have the same capacity. It didn't mean he couldn't be involved, but he could not do what it is that he wanted to do. He was past that stage. And so we see here in verse 3, but the troops replied, "No, you must not march out. If we flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It is much better if you support us from the city." And that must have been hard for David, but he went along with it. And then we find David has not learned much when it comes to his family, and he's repeating the same mistake here that he made that he made with Amnon. And so we see here in verse 5 in chapter 18, the king gave orders to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, "For my sake, protect my boy Absalom." All the troops heard what the king ordered regarding Absalom to all the commanders. So it's not like, well, if you get a chance, I take him alive or anything like that. No, David's commanding them to look after him, protect my boy. This is the one who's just ripped the kingdom apart. This is one who's brought such destruction and dismay in. This is the one who's trying to kill them, and David is telling them to protect. It's just like Amnon. He doesn't want to deal with this. He doesn't want conflict with his family, but it obviously it causes a great deal of conflict. In verse 14, we see that Joab is just, man, he's hard to pin. Joab disobeyed the king for the sake of the king. Just have that in mind. He disobeyed the king for the sake of the king. As long as Absalom is alive, David is under threat. So Joab, being loyal to the king, will disobey the king's orders in order to protect the king, even from his own son. So Joab said, "I won't waste time like this." He's talking to a soldier that pointed out to Joab where Absalom was stuck in a tree. And Joab said, I won't waste time like this with you, because the soldier was pointing out that Joab was after him. He said, "Why didn't you kill him?" And the soldier said, "Are you kidding me? If I killed him, and that was brought to the attention of the king, man, you would distance yourself from me. You would not have my back. So no, it's not for me to do." So Joab said, "I won't waste my time like this with you." He took 3 sticks in his hand and drove them into Absalom's chest while he was still alive in the oak. It wasn't even nice. It wasn't like he took his sword and killed him. Joab was actually very mean about this, and it was a form of torture with Absalom, and then his armor bearers gathered around him, and they're the ones who gave the death blow. So you have to remember that this was enough for Joab. Joab was a loyal Israelite. He loved the kingdom. He loved the king. He was not a righteous man. He did not use proper methods, but he was loyal, and he hated this Israel on Israel. So soon as Absalom was dead, Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped chasing the Israelites because Joab held them back. So he stopped the war. And then we have this. We're going to pick this up not tomorrow, but the day after. We're going to pick up what happens here, okay? Because David really dishonors his troops when he's given the news of Absalom's death. He puts his relationship with his son, his expectations with his son, his desire for his son, ahead of his troops, ahead of these men who just laid down their lives for him, who fought for him. And instead he becomes very selfish, very self-centered. And the king has to be more than that. The king trembled in verse 33 of 18. The king trembled. He went up to the room over the gate and cried. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you. Are you kidding me? These guys just went to bat for you. These guys rescued you. These guys went with you from the city. They decided not to stand with Absalom. They stood on your side. They faced death for you to save your life. They went to war with their brothers to save your life. And you turn around and say, if I had only died in the place of my enemy." Yeah, and Job is gonna have to deal with this. David has become a weak leader in this, and Job's not going to put up with that. Okay, so very sordid affair, but this is what happens when we don't walk in righteousness. We open up the doors to a lot of bad stuff. So take that in mind. If there's anything from your past that you've been involved with, even if you have been forgiven, you need to take time just to shut doors, just break off those curses, shut those doors so that your children are not infected with them. Believe me, I know from personal experience what this is about, and you need to take care of those matters now, right now. Take care of them with the Lord, take care of them in the Spirit, take the authority that has been given to you, and shut those doors. So thanks, guys, for being with me today. Be blessed and be encouraged. He loves you, and he's for you, and he's not against you. And I pray that you have a fantastic day, and we'll meet together again tomorrow. God bless.